do or Avicenna. Okay, we're going to spend a little time now in the Arab and Persian world. This is our history of the world, right? So, Sumeria, Egypt, Greece, Romans start to take over, right? Galen. We had Galen as kind of like the main person for many, many, many years. But the Roman Empire starts to, I think, fall in the 600s. And where does the control, I don't want to say control, but the knowledge and trading and economic and thought and cultural epicenter of the planet, at least in that part of the world, goes to the Arab world. So Persia and the Arab world. So Avicenna is born in 980. This is a weird time historically, too. So right around the year 1000, you know, this is the Dark Ages in Europe. Europe is dark, right? Very dark. Bubonic plague, plagues. Nobody can really read or write except people that are in the priestly class. Herbal medicine stayed alive in the countrysides of the world with grandmas and grandpas. All the books they had were either of Galen or Avicenna. So for the next almost, 700-800 years, Galen and Avicenna rule the Western world. Now, obviously, in like China and India, it's a whole different thing going on. But in my opinion, Avicenna probably the greatest of all the ancient herbal doctors. Remember, at this time, you were like truly a master of all knowledge. This is where people actually quested for knowledge. So Avicenna, for example, was a master of religious studies, astronomy, mathematics, science, surgery, botany, philosophy. He was a poet. So Galen and Avicenna, all these people in this time frame are truly like what we would kind of call Renaissance people. And Avicenna, we have to also get back to this idea that the world has always been a big melting pot. Tribes and cultures and people intermingling. So Persia is a place also during the Dark Ages where everybody can actually have a refuge. There is religious tolerance. So a lot of refugees from all over different parts of the world go to Persia just so they can be safe. Like Jewish people and people from different religions that are being persecuted all go to Persia for safety. And we have places where you have people learning Chinese and Sanskrit and Arabic and all these other languages, all translating things back and forth and all over the place. So it's really a true melting pot. So what is not really discussed a lot historically about Avicenna was he was like this old-fashioned kind of like master of the world type person. And he took all the information that was available to him at the time and created his system of Persian medicine. So he combined, and he says his system is based on Chinese medicine. To me, when you read it, it sounds more like Ayurvedic medicine. So he was also studied Ayurvedic medicine. He also studied all the Greek, Egyptian, Roman, Sumerian, Byzantine, like all the cultures that were known in that world at the time. He absorbed as much as he could of all their medical wisdom and cultural wisdom and created this kind of like a unified system. It's based on Galen's work. So this is like a continuation and a further mastery of Galen's work that adds all kinds of cultural things. What Avicenna also does, in my personal belief, by reading his writings, is he was a true pulse master. So for Western herbalist, his pulse writings are some of the most accurate, descriptive, simple, and on spot of Galen doesn't have that at all. You know, Galen, people thought Galen was a pulse master, but like compared to Avicenna, not at all, in my opinion. Just based on their writings, this is a whole other level. So for me, this is kind of like Chinese and Ayurvedic pulse diagnosis put into a different simplified package. Because the other thing about Avicenna was, even though he was a person of the world, he was an empirist, meaning he valued personal experience over everything and practicality. So he was a very practical person. So he simplified a lot of these more complicated Ayurvedic and Chinese and other Greek concepts, and he kind of like just made it a little more, I like to say, farmer, made it a little more farmer. So I really appreciate that about him, because when he writes, his writing is like amazing. I watched a little video at lunch today about him from some historian. I got really upset because like it's obvious he didn't appreciate the depth of his knowledge and the way he writes, you know.
So you said it's a pulse master. He's very accurate and simple and
It's very simplified. Yeah. So he was born and raised in what is now called Uzbekistan and grew up on the Caspian Sea. Okay. He also studied a lot of metaphysics too. Okay. He's often called the Prince of Medicine or the Prince of Physicians. Some historians call him the first psychiatrist ever because he was extremely into mental health. A lot of discoveries. He's the first person who created the idea of quarantining people who had contagious, serious infections. Again, this is kind of the time of the bubonic plague and some pretty serious stuff. So he actually isolated people at home and made their homes into like their personal kind of hospitals. During this time in Persia, we start to get again what are like some of the first hospitals are formed in Persia. Actually, let me get that here.
do you find as you're studying some of that, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but like with Galen's drought and the fire, was there some silencing going on from factions throughout some of this? Meaning, did certain people only want to have control of some of this information?
Oh yeah, that's always
So
been there from the beginning.
theory was,
Yeah,
the scholar was probably also a politician
yeah,
in a way, because he probably had to
yeah,
figure out how to do it politically
yeah,
so that it could be.
yeah. This is why actually the Dark Ages happen in Europe partially is because the church just strangleholds everything, including writing and reading, and they just put this where you can't grow, you know, people can't have access to basic knowledge and things. So
I just thought it was interesting that Galen had fire, and a third of the
mhm.
notes that he spent
Oh yeah,
time, disappeared forever.
everything's burned. Everything, yeah. All the
Somebody
yeah.
didn't like everybody knowing about or something, we have
When
this today. So
every time Baghdad was invaded during this time, everything was burned, and yeah, we only have a certain percentage of all of his wisdom left. So, but it's interesting that at this time of history, at least in Persia, everybody's getting along. All the cultures are kind of getting along, and Europe's kind of in a really dark age. And I don't exactly know what's going on in China or India at this time, but so let me just throw out a couple other Persian things here if I can find. So did you all realize that throughout history, despite what people think, even before Google Translate, like all these cultures were actually sharing information, and there were hubs of doctors trading information, poets, mathematicians, other scientists, surgeons, like this, like we want to believe everybody is so isolated, but there's not a lot of places like Papua New Guinea pretty isolated, but like a lot of places where there was always this movement of cultural things, usually through war and conquering and things. Okay. Okay. I don't have any other really good Persian notes. So let's just get back to Avicenna. So he wrote his first textbook, The Canon of Medicine, which is his epic, still probably, in my opinion, one of the greatest medical textbooks, herbal medicine textbooks, diagnosis textbooks ever written at the age of 21. Remember, people are dying like at their 40s at this stage of life. You know, we're talking you gotta burn fast. You gotta tear it up. He also, so his textbook, 760 herbs. It's pretty impressive. Yeah. Do you want to know how impressive this book is? 760. Yeah. Know how impressive his book is? Um, every element of medicine is there in his book. Urine analysis, fingernail analysis, face analysis, tongue diagnosis, pulse diagnosis, palpating muscles, palpating your internal organs, skin diagnosis, smell diagnosis, speech diagnosis, body posture diagnosis. This is all in this book. Then it has every disease that was known at the time and all the treatments. This is a lot of stuff. And for every disease, this is a true diehard constitutional, master. So for every disease, even in 1000 AD, for every disease, like say tuberculosis, there would be, if you look in his book, there'll be like up to 9 different prescriptions based on the Constitution, completely different treatments for like dry tuberculosis, hot tuberculosis, cold tuberculosis. And for each disease, it will talk about the pulse, how it would be different, what the different herbs would be, or the diet. So yeah, the book is called translates as The Canon of Medicine. Don't buy it. It's very expensive to buy translations. The only book you really need is this. After all of them that I've gathered over the years, this is called Avicenna's Medicine.
Other one is 820.
Yeah, it's very expensive. And it's very, so this is written by a group of Arab doctors who were medical doctors, but have been trained in what's called Unani Tib that we'll talk about. So they're actually practitioners of Western medicine in Avicenna's system. So they're translating all the stuff we don't know how to translate. And this is not the whole textbook, but it is a synopsis of his entire book, the most important chapters. And it reads really well, reads very easily.
Is it similar to Chinese medicine?
Very similar. Yeah. We still have Galen, we have the 4 elements, we have all that, none of that's changed. And there's all the 6 tissue states like tense, relaxed, dry, damp, hot, cold. All that's there. He's just really starting to go to a mastery level with all the details. Okay. Um, yeah, yeah. So, and he also really goes into the causes for all these. This is like also, by the way, if you're really wanting like deeper writing about the Constitution, which is hard to come by sometimes, this is some of the deepest constitutional writing you'll ever see. That just so easy. It's so concise and simple. So, so he actually creates a entire system of medicine called Unani Tib. This is what the Persian medicine would be called. Why is this important? Because Unani Tib is still practiced today throughout the world. Unani Tib, especially in India, Pakistan, the Middle East, that area, but also around the world. You can actually go to Unani Tib medical school in some countries, and you can be a doctor just like you would be a naturopathic doctor here. You'd be a doctor of Unani Tib. So this is like a living system, all based on his work that has never died out at all. So, but to me, what's unique about it, it is Western medicine, herbal medicine, with all some of the best little pieces of like Chinese and Ayurvedic and other things, and then simplified. It's just really brilliant writing.
I know in the literature, when I was growing up, especially my grandmother, they would use a lot of herbal remedies in the culture, and I'm wondering if it kind of been passing down through this type of.
Probably all through that, right? He was, yeah, very much not a fan of overly philosophical thinking. It had to be like practical. So when you read Galen, it's like I said, it's like 5 pages to just say something is damp. It's really that wordy, where he's just saying this is damp and this is what dampness is, a couple paragraphs. So a lot of concepts in here. I mean, we could spend a lot of time. How do we cherry pick what he did? He's so significant. So he wrote probably over 200 textbooks also. Only, again, about 100 have survived to this day. And again, most of them, like most books, you're not going to find translations of. Only about a certain percentage of those were on medicine, because again, he wrote books of poetry, right? Very Rumi-like. He wrote books on philosophy. Do you know the famous Descartes saying, I think, therefore I am, which revolutionized philosophy? He actually said that exact same thing many years before Descartes. So he was like a true philosopher. So why he's also important, because Galen and his work, like to me, this expands Galen's work a little bit. But all of the information as the Roman Empire is falling apart, all the textbooks, all the knowledge go to Persia where they're saved. This is like the lineage. And then eventually during the Renaissance, after the Dark Ages, Europe goes to Persia and finds translations and retranslates them back into the European languages. But if it wasn't for Persia, it would all probably been lost. So it's pretty interesting. Okay. What else do we want to say about him? I study his pulse stuff all the time because I find it's really, really helpful. In fact, it's actually how I base how I teach the pulse to this class, because it's very simplified.
Does that book reference the pulse?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, has great pulse right up in there. This is also a time, remember, religion and medicine haven't totally separated. You know, in Greek and Roman times, there was some conflicts, but they haven't totally separated yet. Okay. But he was also good at finding a balance between keeping some cultural, spiritual, maybe superstitious, some people would say it, things alive, but not being afraid to say, hey, this is like just a bad, negative thing, practice. So, okay, he wrote books on the psyche, the body and mind. One of his books is called The Origin of Grief. Wrote a book on dream interpretation, which is some of it's included in that book that's going around. It's pretty cool. Okay. Like every master we've seen before him, they all say, and he said the exact same thing, you can't just read it. You have to do it. You have to give it to people and see how it works. You got to prove it to yourself. So until the 1700s, this is, with Galen's work, all there is in the Western world. Was that there's nothing else. This is it. There is grandma and grandpas that are going around healing their families, keeping this wisdom alive somehow, but the rest of it's just barely hanging by. Okay. This is very deep constitutional writing. Writes extensively about the relationship between the body and the mind. It's probably because of his influence from Chinese medicine. He felt that the spirit also resided in the heart. All diseases start with a change in constitution by these humors getting imbalanced. So either hot or cold or dry or moist or tense or relaxed or changing. And that's what's triggering all this process. Okay. What else? We have the 4 elements. He also is trained in distillation and alchemy. So this is when alchemy is starting to rise from the secret echoes of the ancient past, and is starting to become talked about openly now in Persia. In fact, distillation first of essential oils first happens in Persia. Okay. So 9 types of assessment for any disease: hot, cold, damp, dry, hot and dry, hot and wet, cold and dry, cold and wet, and the 9th option is balance. It's just all the humors, right? Hot, cold, damp, dry, hot and dry, hot and wet, cold and dry, cold and wet. And then the 9th is just balance. That your constitution is constantly changing every second. And your diet and lifestyle should acclimate to it. We should change with the seasons. So he is recommending cleansing by the seasons. He's also talking about how we treat people may change based on like whether they're male or female, what climate they're living in, how short or tall or what their body weight is. He's getting into dosing and things like that haven't probably been talked about a lot. I don't want to go to it. I just, when I start to talk about the 4 humors, my brain shuts down. We have the sanguine and all that. So I still, even with his description, I just can't do it. So, so when I hear phlegmatic, I just think cold and wet, and that's all I need to know. That totally explains it all to me. So this is the code, if you want to know the code. So the phlegmatic humor is cold and wet. The melancholy humor is cold and dry. The bilious or choleric humor is hot and dry. And the sanguine humor is hot and wet. And to me, that's all I need to know. The other words just throw my brain off. Yeah, most of it. Yeah. Also, like Chinese medicine, he talks about digestion as the basis of everything, and digestion is like a soup, right? So We have our pot, which is the stomach. You have the flame, which is your digestive power, or your liver and pancreas that creating all those enzymes, and that is cooking in a pot, which is your stomach. So it's a heating process, right? So we have the same idea that heat is the basis of life, the spark of life, and moisture is what sustains life. Okay. There's a lot in your notes. So I'll just leave it at that. Go over all that because I've spent a lot of time trying to decipher all this. One of my favorite sayings, there is no incurable diseases, only the lack of will. There are no worthless herbs, only the lack of knowledge. That's beautiful. Yeah. He has this, also the width of life is more important than the length of life. Oh, there's just so much there. That book, I just have to say that book is just deeply impressive. And the translation of it is amazing. And I want everybody to study the Avicenna notes because it has, I wrote pulse notes, like a sketch outline, and that's kind of how I teach pulse. I find like it's very compatible with the basic overview of Chinese medicine and a lot of the eclectic pulse taking that will do. So it's a good little overview. Simpler than you think, by the way. Like fast and slow, long and short, hard and soft. Like some of it's just really basic once you start to break it down. Skipping or not skipping, right? Okay. I have a lot of pulse notes in there actually that I've collected from different writings, and they're not all super organized, but they're there. So, and what they mean. Questions on Avicenna or Avicenna? What's that? He 980 to 1037. So 50, almost 60. That's a lot back then. That's pretty old. Yeah. Most people are dying at 35. Remember, up until Culpeper's time, the average lifespan, in the 1800s in England is 30, 35 years. So we're talking, 800 years fast forwarded. This is still a very long life.
They were considered like men and women like age 12. I mean,
Yeah,
very young,
yeah,
so,
yeah. Which is wild to think about. Getting married and all of that, and yeah, that just still blows my mind.
Let's just talk about that stomach that you were mentioning, because I know that was a very cultural
Mhm.
culture, which is you always wrap a baby's stomach. I mean, it was a
Oh, yeah.
huge deal if you did. I mean, still to this day, they like reprimand you if your baby's stomach is fat.
Yeah, that's a big deal in Asian culture too.
In Mexico.
That's where the cummerbund came from, that you see in martial arts. So martial arts too, that's where the belts came from in old times. They protect your energy center, and then they had colors to them, but originally it was keep your energy tight and protected so it doesn't leak out.
So. If we look at all of these practitioners through history, they're always referencing the Constitution. Did the Constitution get lost after the eclectics? Is that when it went away in medicine about?
Yeah, it's there during Culpeper, but I think a lot of the language and everything is starting to fade away. So, and then it kind of gets rebirthed a little bit in America in a real different way. So, a true American twist on it. So, okay. Any other questions on Avicenna? One of the great, maybe in my opinion, maybe the greatest, one of the greatest masters, let's just say one of the greatest levels of achievement You know, it's always an achievement when you can explain something very complicated extremely simply. That's when you know people really understand something. And what takes Galen 5 pages, he can do in a paragraph. So that's very, very nice. Okay, so we should go to the next one. Okay.